honoured to have another guest in the Design Notes studio, and this is the designer of Akrotiri, Belfort, and the current smash hit, Mind Management. This is Sen-Foong Lim. Sen, welcome to the Design Notes studio.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Ben. Just to note, I am the co-designer of those things. I have to be very specific about that.
Absolutely. So on that topic of being suitably modest, I'd ask you for this first question, if you could just park your modesty at the door and sort of unleash your braggadocious self. So my first question, my first question is, when did you know that you were good at what you do?
Well, let me tell you. It's funny because I've always known I've been quote unquote good at it, but I guess I do not lack for confidence. I think that's something that being on stage from a very young age has taught me. But in terms of being good or really good, I think it was when the lawyer from Warner Brothers asked me what episode of Scooby Doo, excuse me, we had watched to get the plot for the game. And I said, no, we wrote that. Like, oh, it's exactly like it should be then. Okay, good. So that was when I kind of first really got that feather in the cap of saying, this is what we're good at, is making games that are relatable to people who know the IP super, super well. And it was really a good kind of pat on the back because we put so much effort into Scooby-Doo and it paid off in a lot of ways, not even monetarily. That's not the important thing. For me, it was that the IP that I loved got represented well on the tabletop and that people who were intimately tied to the IP didn't even know the difference. So that was great.
Yeah, so you've designed original designs and IP games, and Mind Management is based on an IP. What is the kind of work that goes into gamifying something from a different media?
Well, it's interesting because Jay and I were talking the other day, and we both think that our kids are going to have a very weird idea of what work looks like. Because my kids see me reading comic books and playing video games and watching anime. That is my job. So they also do that. They think they're working. No, I'm kidding. But it's a lot of consumption, like a lot of consumption. I seriously right now on the other monitor have a comic reader up. Just I'm reading a bunch of comics because we have to intimately know the IP. Just like I said before, it's an intimacy problem. It's an intimacy problem. No, it's not a problem. It's getting intimate with the source material so that even when we love it, we know it. Because I love lots of source material, but it's like I couldn't tell you exactly when in the series this happened or things like that because I might have watched it, 10 years ago. And right now I'm looking at a comic that I read when I was a kid. 1986, in fact, it was when I first read this comic, sitting on the floor of a drugstore in a mall in Canada. And I remember specifically the mall. I remember specifically the time. And I remember the cover of this comic. And it has lived with me since then, but I don't remember all the little nuanced things or like the names of some of the secondary characters. And so a lot of it is refreshing. A lot of it is trying to figure out how do we represent that on the tabletop. I think that's the trick. And for me, that's the most fun part. If, say it's Superman, it's not. I'm not talking about Superman. But if it was Superman, how do you represent X-ray vision in a game? How do you represent heat vision in the game? How do you represent flight and supersonic hearing and the Fortress of Solitude? How would you represent all that in a game? And then with Superman, you have to think, okay, well, what about Kryptonite? What about Lex Luthor? What about all these things that are part of the lore of Superman? And how do we get those into a game such that anybody who's playing the game that knows Superman well will say, that is Superman. That feels like the Superman I know and love, which is actually pretty on topic right now because Batman, the movie, is coming out as we speak. And I am tired of all the dark Batman that we've been getting in the past. We've never really had a good detective Batman movie. And, I'm hopeful that there is at least some detecting in this one. He's called the world's greatest detective, people. Let's do some detecting. Which is why, by the way, my favorite piece of Batman stuff is the animated series, because the animated series ran so long that it covered the whole gamut of what
Mm.
Batman can be and what Batman is to fans. So I think that really did the best job, in my opinion. So that's why I like that piece of media.
And so one thing the internet has done is created a whole new sort of strata of appreciation. Whereas before you had people who liked something, and then you had experts. Now you have fans and you have fandom. And that seems to me to have a level of ownership that didn't really exist previously. I mean, how trepidatious are you in entering the field of making an IP game that, not only do you want to service the fans and make sure that people who really rabidly love something will love your version of it, but are you worried that people will come after you?
I'm not worried about that people come after me like violently or anything, but I mean, I know that people may not be happy, and that's something that we kind of have to live with. That we won't make everybody happy. We won't make all the fans happy. Um, so when we did the Batman game, that was Alara Cameron and I did a Batman game that was based on the animated series. It's not going to be, Dark Knight Batman. It's not going to
Mm.
be first year Batman, year one. It's going to be that very specific animated series Batman. And people should know that and understand that. But when you make something as general as, this is a Batman game, then you might have people saying, that's not my Batman. And, yeah, fandom is weird because these are people who profess to absolutely adore this thing. And yet they are often the most harshest critics of people who are trying to create in that space, who have the legal right to create in that space because
Mm.
we paid for those rights, and who are getting approved by the IP holders, right? Which is the funniest thing. It's like, well, they approved it, Lucasfilm approved this version of whatever, so it is what it is. Um, and I think that sense of ownership and entitlement to the quote unquote canon of something is an interesting problem. And games, I think board games have a little bit of leeway because they're abstractions always, right? We're always
Mm.
abstracting something. It's not like this is the full tale word for word of something. It's not like a novelization of a movie, or it's not a movie, or it's not a comic. It's not the original source material in the format of the source. So it's got a little bit of leeway and allowance just by virtue of it being, one step removed. So we're a little bit safer where things don't run in real time. Video games aren't. Video games, because they
Mm.
run like a movie sometimes or like a comic book sometimes, they get, a little bit more poked by fandom, I think. We are somewhat safe right now, but you never know. You never know.
And so, you've worked on Batman, but I assume that you didn't consult with Bob Kane during the making of that game.
No, couldn't do
You
that.
you worked on Scooby Doo,
Mhm.
and I assume you didn't consult with Hanna and Barbera when you were working on that game. But
Couldn't do that.
with Mind Management, you did consult with the creator of the property whilst making the game.
We did more than consult. We basically lived in each other's brains.
Right. How does that help or hinder the process of creating something based on a property?
Well, so for both of the other ones that you mentioned, we have access to like what's called a style guide or
Mm.
a Bible, a book, like a showrunner Bible for those things. So I know things about Scooby Doo that would blow your mind in terms of like what the color of his tongue has to be in a cell. Those types of things. I know that. I can't call it up from memory, but I do know it, and I just look it up. There it is in the style guide. But for mind management, because we worked with Matt Kint being the writer and the Arthur, which is like an author and artist at the same
Right.
time of the book. Um, he's amazing to work with just because he's super willing to make things. B, he's just as forgetful as the fans are sometimes. He's like, oh, that thing? I don't remember writing that. Let's see what it is. Uh, and he's also really, really awesome. He'll create new art for us on the fly. And that's really what the off the page impression was kind of all about. When Jay started that, he had the idea of a really niche label that would help him make games with, not for, not about, but with the actual creators of the comic books that we both love.
Mm.
And with Mind Management, it proved to be exactly that, where we met with Matt at Gen Con a couple years ago, and even before we made the game, we became friends. That was the deal. It's like, oh, we like your stuff. In fact, Jay had actually met Matt before that at like Rose City Comic Con, I
Mm.
think, or Emerald, one of them, and had got Matt to draw some pictures for him. And we're like, yeah, I have art of yours, that you drew a couple years ago, hanging up all the time. It's awesome. And Matt's like, oh, I have a game of yours that I play and I love it, And so we became mutual friends and admirers of each other, and that kind of relationship has really helped Jay and I over the long run in general. We're friends first. We've been best friends for, I don't know what now. How old am I? For over 30 years, Jay and I have
Mm.
been best friends, and so that kind of relationship helps things grow. It's not just business. We want this to survive beyond whatever money we may make from this. And then Matt is a friend of ours as well, and so we want to represent his product, his passion, his line as well as we can. And we feel that about all the games that we're working on for off the page games. The next one, Harrow County, I'm not particularly working on it. I've play tested it a bunch of times, but that's Jay and our friend Shad Miller. And that is another creative team that we both adore, Tyler Crook and Cullen Bunn. And we love the comic, and it's representing the things that matter to those creatives, honoring their vision, and then getting them to help with that vision, right? So always, always, always something that's going to happen, I hope, through off the pages, is that the artist will make new artists. Oh, will make new artists, if they have babies, I guess. But the the artist will make new art, original art that fans of the comics will like, oh, I have to have that because it's got this new art in it. And a lot of times we're working with artists who are so passionate about their craft, and we're working on titles that have been around for a little while. So they're like, yeah, I can do it better this time.
Mm.
I can make a better version of that for the game because I've leveled up in my skill over the past 7 years since we first wrote that thing. And then for the writers, we're asking them for, their impressions, and, if they can write some story, if they can write some flavor text, if they want to write scenarios, if it was a scenario based thing. So getting the creators of the IP to be deeply, deeply involved. So it's not just a licensed product. It's actually, their product as well, that they are proud of, that they can sell at their booth at a Comic Con, and we can sell it at our booths at a game convention, and we all know it and we all love it. It's not just
Mm.
a product. It's part of the verse. It's part of the world they created. It's the culmination, in fact, of a lot of that love. And we're seeing a lot of that right now in all across like media, where comics are getting licensed for shows, games are getting licensed for TV shows on Netflix, and vice versa. Comics for games that now have comics based on them, like Dead of Winter, I think, has a comic. And so all these kind of things are really, really interesting. It's a really interesting time to be a fan because you're going to get to see these things you love expressed in many, many different ways. And I hope that you're a fan that isn't going to be the finger pointy judgmental fan, like, oh, that wasn't the color of that character's, shirt in this episode at this time. Let's not be that person.
And so, do you think that there is something inherent about comics that lends themselves to game adaptations, or is it just they share a kind of nerdy niche, so there's this sort of natural osmosis?
Well, I mean, for me and Jay, they share a nerdy niche. This is like our probably comics for a lot of people are one of the first fandoms and nerddoms that you really get into other than like television,
Mm.
because they're so readily accessible. For me, it was accessible because I had relatives who owned a corner store, and they would order like one of every comic from DC, and so they would keep one of each comic in a garage, and they happened to live across from my public school, the school I went to when I was in pre-kindergarten all the way up
Mm.
to grade 8. And so I'd go across at lunch and grab some comics and read them. And I've read pretty much every single comic in DC from like 1967 to probably 1970 something or 1980 something, just because of that vast library that I had access to. Um, and so a lot of people, first read graphic novels instead of books, right? They get captured by this because they're sometimes a little more mature.
Mm.
They're fun, they're interesting, they're visual. Plus, they've got words. So parents are like, yeah, you can read that. That looks like something that you can look at by yourself. And so comics and graphic novels have become really that great first introduction to reading for lots of kids, which then leads to comic books and graphic novels that are based on other types of properties. So, yeah, I think comics do lend themselves really well to board games because sequential storytelling, that's the fancy term for comic books.
Mm.
Sequential storytelling is again abstracted, right?
Mm.
It's just one step removed, and you can do some really cool things in comic book storytelling that you cannot do in more real-time visual medias like television or movies. Vice versa, there's tons of stuff you can do in those mediums, I guess is the word, that you can't do in comic books. And so games, being even further abstracted, are able to take that kind of slower pace of a comic book and really generate interest at the in-betweens,
Mm.
in the margins, right? And I think that's kind of why they capture the imagination. First of all, like comic books capture the imagination, but also then why board games are a great way to translate that into something that you could actively take a part in. Now, don't get me wrong, movies, adaptations, video game adaptations, all great. But I think board games do have a place in the pantheon of comic book products. And, when I was a kid, they were all crappy because they were just, reskins of something and put on the table with the Batman logo on it. It's a Batman deck of
Mm.
cards. It's like, yeah, I get it, I got it. But let's have something more. Let's have something that feels like I'm playing Robin or the Batman or Batgirl or Catwoman or whoever happens to be on in the Bat family at the time. And so, yeah, I do think that board games are really good at translating the comic book to the tabletop because of sort of the speed and the thinkiness of it all. At least that's what I like about comic books, is that I can read them quickly, but think a lot about them,
Mm.
which is different than reading a full prose novel, and very different than uh, a movie. Movies, I don't think about them while I'm watching the movie. I just kind of consume and
Mm.
then think about them later and talk about it later with friends. But comic books, I'm thinking in between the panels. Just like games, I'm thinking in between my turns, right? So I think it's a good sort of transitional piece of media, or games are art, games are media, games are things to interact with, whatever you want to call them. Games are good. That's all.
So, sort of moving away from IP games specifically,
Sure.
can you give us an overview of your designing process from sort of idea to a game that's in a box that people put on a table and beat me at?
Sure. So conceptualization is probably my favorite part of game design. I get less and less interested in game design as it gets further and further along the line, to be completely honest, which is why Jay ran or runs off the page games without me currently, because I have no interest in all that stuff that happens once we press, print.
Mm.
I'm not that interested in it. currently, and it's not due to a lack of interest in the goings on. It's really a lack of interest because if I was interested in it, I would lose focus on my day job, which would be a bad thing. I get really caught up in things, and so I know what my limits are, and I know to play within those limits. Um, because I have a personality that would tend to get really into things, like really really into things, like so much so that I had four of every magic card in existence at a time. That's how much I love collecting and spending time thinking deeply about something. And so I said, yeah, Jay, you do that because you want to leave your job. I am fine with my job. I'll join you on this journey as a designer, and bounce all your ideas off me. That's wonderful. But in the end of the day, you're the one responsible for it. But back to the question at hand, ideation is really, and conceptualization is really where I kind of think a lot about games. Um, and so what I'm trying to do is create an experience or provide an experience. I actually think of board games as curated experiences in a box. That's what I think board games are. And when you open that box, whether you win or lose because your name is Ben Maddox,
Mm.
you are going to have an experience that I, as the designer, have carefully laid out for you, and that is supposed to play a specific way. And if it does what it's supposed to do, it should be a good experience for you. You should not have to house rule things. If you want to, that's fine. It's your box of stuff. Do what you want. But it is a carefully crafted and designed thing. And the thing that I'm designing is an experience. So what do I mean by experience? I mean that it's a feeling. It's emotions. It's not just mechanical actions. It's mechanical actions that evoke something. It's not just a theme. It's a theme that evokes a feeling. And everything that's in that box should be supportive of that experience that I'm targeting, whether it's rules, art on cards, the theme that we've chosen, but maybe even especially the mechanics that we chose, right? So when I talk about experiential design, I often talk about it like a house
Mm.
where there's a roof, and that's the thing you see the most, right? Any picture of a city, you're always going to see like the roofs of the houses. So that's the experience, is the roof. And in order for you to see that, it's got to be supported, right, by things and walls and whatnot. And that's what I'm thinking of when I think about the theme or the mechanics. A lot of people think in that broad kind of dichotomy of,
Mm.
is it thematic or is it mechanical? And so using that and leveraging that, I would say those are the walls that support the theme. Sorry, the experience, that's the roof. Now, what I mean by supporting an experience is that just because you pick a theme doesn't mean that it necessarily supports an experience, and just because you pick a mechanism doesn't mean that intrinsically supports an experience, right? There's a reason why people in things like combat games where there's conflict, really like chucking dice,
Mm.
because it should be uncertain. There's no certainty in that. You know, if you have two equally skilled combatants that, oh, this hit is going to do exactly 1 point of damage and this hit is going to do exactly 3 points of damage. And so oftentimes people like that feeling of randomness because they also want a chance. That's the other thing. You get the experience of like scraping through by the skin of your teeth. That's an experience that you can't have with very set cards, or this is exactly how much damage you do so I can calculate when I'm going to die. I have 3 turns until I die.
Mm.
That provides a different experience, and it's not necessarily bad. It's just different, right? So, for example, a game like Slay the Spire, if you've ever played that on PC or Switch or iPhone, available pretty much any
Mm.
platform. It is very measurable as to how much damage you're going to cause. What is not measurable is things like, which cards come up in order. That's the variable, right? So, but once you get your cards, it's like planning and thinking. which is really good for that kind of game because it's a solo game where you kind of want to progress as far as you can. The goal is to get as far as you can. Whereas in a skirmish style game like say Warhammer 40K or something like that, that's not really the point of it. The point is to like have these wild emotional swings. And so mechanisms can really be that area of thematic integration and support that overall experience that I think a lot of designers kind of miss. So, for example, mind management, Matt wanted to create a feeling of paranoia because
Mm.
that's really what the comic is about. At a lot of levels, is like who's on your side? Do you know where they are? What are they doing? Are they tricking you? And so we went through a bunch of prototypes for that where it's like, oh yeah, it's an interesting game, but it really doesn't support the experience that we're looking for. And so eventually we came across or fell on really kind of the idea of what about hidden movement? Would hidden movement do it? And we messed around with that for a while, and it's like, yeah, this really does it. And for me, the reason why it does it is because it makes me feel like a psychic,
Mm.
which is funny, right? So, how it makes me feel like a psychic is because we've made a game that's many versus one, which is the way a lot of hidden movement games work, of course. The many, the team of many, the rogue agents is what we call them. They are always talking. They're always talking.
Mm.
But oh, I think he's here. Oh no, he must have went there. They probably went this way. Oh, we've got to get them here. What if they did this? And I'm listening to that whole conversation while I'm playing on the other side of the screen. And I'm going, yeah, what if I did do that? And I might actually suggest to them, no, I didn't do that. So like I'm totally like getting in their heads. It's a head game. And even though I don't really have psychic powers, I might, but I'm not going to tell you if I did, because then you'd send like rogue agents to come hunt me down.
It's true.
But
I have
if
a
I
lot of rogue
did,
agents at my disposal.
I know. If I did have psychic powers, that's what it would be like. It'd be like suggesting to them what I did. And so I find that the experience that we created really does create that sense of paranoia on both sides because I'm like, they're about to get me. That's the common cat and mouse feeling that you get when playing hidden movement games. But because of the theme and because of how much talking and discussing there is, because you get so many clues, there's that back and forth that's a little bit different than a lot of other um, hidden movement games that I think mind management does really well. And then everything that we put into the game, all of the little secrets and things like that, some of them are just for funsies. Some of them actually take you to a website that will get you new cards to play in the game if you can figure out if you can crack the codes. So we put all sorts of secret codes in there. We also did say, okay, for those of you who want, professionally printed copies of those cards that will match your set, here's a new Kickstarter. So that's the
Mm.
last one we did, was about that. And also to give people an opportunity to get the deluxe version because we can only print so many. We can't store things a lot. We just don't have the space. So we only printed as much as we thought we needed. And then we got really good reviews. And people are like, oh, I want the version that they're playing with. Oh, well, then we have to do a whole new print run. And we've got really lucky and thankful to all of the supporters that they said, hey, we'd like several thousand of these.
Mm.
So that's been really good. And that will help us, do even more games about comics in the future that really, really feel like it could have been something that the creator of the comic created themselves. And that's partially true because they did help, right? So Matt's been along for the ride on this whole thing from day one. He play tests the game with us. He sucks at them sometimes. He's horrible with forgetting rules, and he'll probably listen to this and say, "Yep, that's me." But he is there along the way to say, "Hey, what if we did this? What if we did that?" And some of the stuff he thinks of, totally off the wall. But it's like, "Oh yeah, what if we did that? What if we did do that? That would be cool." Um, and then he's also super willing to do anything we ask in terms of art, which is really nice because he's made like brand new comics for the game alone. He's done art for the comic that is just um, in the game that is just will blow your mind in terms of like I've never seen anybody use the bottom of the board quite the way you guys did. So if you get to see the board, look at the bottom of it, and then take the mini map that the mind management player, the eraser, uses. Well, it's not always the eraser, but the mind management player uses, and then you'll see on the bottom of that there's another comic. And how do those two interact? Fascinating stuff. Yeah, so he's thought of a lot of really neat ways to do things. I think he really likes, tricking people and being clever, and that is the game. It's tricking people and being clever, and so he's incorporated all of that tricksiness into the artwork itself. So the whole game feels like a holistic package that was born out of the brain of three people and really represents the brand well. And in terms of IP games, not to go back there too long, but that is the goal. That's the literal goal, is what we call brand extension, right? Is that we've extended Matt's brand into gamerdom, which, does have, like you said, that niche joint love of comics a lot of times. But we had done so well that there's increased demand for his comics. And Dark Horse, the publishers, had to reprint the omnibuses because of the demand, which is something you don't see every day,
Sure.
right? For a comic that's probably a decade old now, where the publisher says, "Oh, we were getting a lot of demand for this. What's happened? Oh, that game. Oh, yeah, that thing." But that's what every publisher would want, right? Is renewed interest in something that they can then sell, because capitalism, yay. But for Matt and us, it's more like we've got more people to read this awesome thing.
Excellent. So I've got two more questions for you.
Sure.
So imagine you're at a convention and it's the evening and you go out for a meal and you're coming back from the loo and there's a table of gamers and you hear your name mentioned. So you sidle into the corner and you eavesdrop on their conversation. What do you hope they're saying about you?
About me personally? Nothing. I am one of those self-effacing type of people that I don't seek out that kind of thing. Part of me in my heart of hearts would say, you should go and say something to them. You should introduce yourself. But often it's like, no, can't do that. I'm the type of person who looks away when my name is called. Not on social media, oddly enough. On social media, it's easy to type because you're so disconnected. But in person, I'm really not an extrovert, even though I seem like one in a lot of the things that I do. I'm an extrovert by proxy, which means that I have a lot of friends who are extroverted, and so I have to be too if I want to hang out with them. But if it was just me, I would be still in that corner thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But what would I hope they would say about me, I guess, is different. I actually wouldn't hope they said anything about me. I would hope they would talk about the game. And for a lot of designers, we talk about, oh, the game is like our baby, and it is. It's an extension of us. This is my thing. This is my art. This is my creativity on the table. And so I would hope they were saying kind things about the game. I would hope they were, if they were critical, they were critical. That's okay. I don't mind criticism. I just don't particularly like, the way some people are critical. And so it's kind of funny. Like I don't read reviews much. Jay does. Jay will send me, oh, did you see this review? It's like, no, didn't see it. Because I don't care. And it's not that I don't care because I don't like them. It's just I can't care in a lot of ways because I think I would be really negatively affected by negative feedback in some ways. But also can't keep up with it all. Got other things that I need to do, like make new games. And I'm going to make games despite what people say and what people think about the ones that I've already passed, because my goal in kind of everything that I do is to be better tomorrow at that thing that I am today. I'm kind of like a craftsman when it comes to those things. So I'm a professor. Every year I take out my slides and I go through my slides, and I have thousands of them. Say, what can I cut out? Or what can I do better? Or how can I teach this in a different way? I'm a black belt in a martial art, and every time I hit the mats, it's like, how can I throw this person better? How can I choke them out better? Everything that I do, I am improving myself at the next go round. And the same thing with games. Um, you know, Belfort is one of our first games and probably still our highest ranked game and probably still one of the most critically well received games. Uh, but I think we've done better. I think my management is phenomenal. But I also think some of my little card games and silly things like that are great. I think my role playing games are really fun and interesting. Do I think they're the best thing in the world? No, not really. But I do think that they're worthy of play. And I think they're worthy of discussion. And so, it's funny because after the product's out, I don't necessarily care about what people say about things. And the reason why is because before the product goes out, I really care about what people say about it.
Mm.
So much so that that actually is my litmus test as to whether or not a game is ready to go to publication or at least be shown to a publisher is when people talk about the game after the fact. And I don't mean like, oh, that's a great game or oh, I would buy that game. I mean talk about the game. Like, oh, next time we play, I'm going to
Mm.
try this strategy. Oh, next time, oh, I'm going to buy that card because that card seems to be like the linchpin card in the build. Or oh, next time we play, I want to try this character class out because it seems like you had a great time. That's what I want to hear from people. So that's what I want to hear. But again, I would rather hear it in the process of making the game than after the fact. After the
Mm.
fact, I kind of forget about a lot of my games. It sounds bad, but I'm moving on to the next thing. As a creative, I need to move on because I can't just focus on one thing, which is another reason why being a publisher may not be my bag yet, because publishers have to stay on that one thing and they have to sell that one thing. And we might be selling mind management forever. I hope that'd be great. But uh, that may get me not so, you know, that may not get me the creative juices that I need
Mm.
to keep going. It's sort of like a touring band. You often ask touring musicians like, "Aren't you sick of playing Sweet Home Alabama every night?" Yeah. So I mean, I was a musician, I was a DJ. It's funny because DJing, you'd think you get sick and tired of playing the same records over and over again, but there's the act of mixing and the act of creating the mix and the vibe in the club and all that kind of stuff that makes it more than just the act of playing those same records over and over again. The same thing with playing music, the same music over and over again. Each time is a slightly different experience. Um, I think what I hate most about touring is just lugging gear. Oh my gosh, that stuff is heavy. Uh, that's why there's roadies, man. But I was not good enough to actually have a roadie ever. It was always me lugging in my synthesizers and my gear and whatnot. So, um, yeah, and I think the same thing with games. Like I still play the games I make after they're published, just not as much as I did before they were published. And it's not that I'm tired of them. They're games. My games. I'll always play my games. It's just I have moved on to something else. My brain has moved on, and so I want to focus on the next thing. I think.
So, my last question then is, why is gaming good?
Oh, I mean, how much time do you got? So, gaming is good for lots of reasons. So, as a person who is a professor in developmental psychology, uh, play is the thing, right? The bard said it, I'll say it. I'll mean it differently than the bard meant it, but the play is the thing um, in which we will learn how to be human as opposed to catching the king. And the idea here is that through play, we learn about the world, we learn about ourselves, we learn about our place in the world. We learn how to interact with our environment. We learn new skills like, math. We learn how to communicate. We learn to take turns. We learn pragmatic skills like how to get what we want out of people by talking to them. And all those things we're doing in a manner that is play as children. And then as we become adults, we practice those through play and being playful. It was funny. We were talking about this on a design forum like just the other day, and a lot of people were coming up with the notion that children play a lot, but they're not necessarily always playful,
Mm.
whereas adults play less, but when they do play, they tend to be more playful, and that's a really interesting dichotomy, because it's kind of true that for some children, play is hard.
Mm.
Play is hard work because it is their work. It's their meaningful occupation. It's what they're doing in order to get better at that thing or skills associated with that thing. And they don't have them because they're just kids. Whereas adults can be more playful because they have most of those skills already and they can use those skills in more creative ways, because they have that degree of expertise. But we wouldn't be that playful as adults if we didn't play as children. And so gaming is good because it allows us to do all of those things within what we call like a sacred circle. If we're talking about, um, who was that? Sorry, I'm just blanking on the name. Uh,
Eric Zimmerman?
no, we didn't.
Huizinga?
Yeah, Huizinga, that's it. So yeah, in that magic circle of play, where we have rules, but we also have rules that may contradict those in polite society. We get to explore, we get to learn about relationships, we get to learn about things like lying and cheating and bluffing, and what happens when you don't tell the truth. You can have fun, but we don't do that outside the magic circle. Inside the magic circle, we can attack our friends, we can look at these relationships of conflict, and at the end we shake hands and say, good game, that was awesome, that was fun. I don't like that I lost, but it's only within this little circle that I've lost. So I think play also has that really good safety net around it where we can show each other that, we can compete fiercely with each other, but at the end still respect each other. Which I hope that more people understand about not flipping the table and all that kind of stuff. It was interesting. I was reading an article yesterday on martial arts and the Muslim faith, because I teach a grappling art, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and we have a student that is Muslim, and they cannot bow, in the same way that the other students would bow, because there is a prohibition on Muslims of a who might be more traditional than some other Muslims to not bow to other people,
Mm.
only to Allah, right? And so we're trying to figure this out. Like, how do we do this? What's wrong with bowing, and why can't they bow? And then how can we get the same message without the bow? If it's only bowing that's the problem, like, I personally don't care if they bow or not, but why are we bowing? And so the idea that was brought up in this article was really nice, that at the end of a match, which is a game, we bow to each other to show that we respect each other outside of this match. We're going to go hard, we're going to give our best in the match, but when we bow out of the match, we're back to being civil people to each other. The match is over, no matter who won. And I think that's what games allow us to do a lot of times, is be competitive, but in a civil manner, which doesn't happen a lot nowadays in video gaming, right?
Right.
With like some real toxic environments and chats and live chats. So, that's the area where I think there's that social aspect of it where we don't have the rules around that. Although now we do. We have games like Hearthstone that don't actually have a live chat. They just have some things you can say that express you're angry or express you're frustrated or express, hey, good game. But they'll be in the voice of that character, and there's a set list. You cannot go outside of that. And I think that's really an interesting way of, kind of having not compelled speech, but limited speech, to for the betterment of that community, right? So yeah, I think gaming's great. Do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think it could be perfect? Sure. But it's got this problem. That problem is people, uh, which is always going to be a problem. So is it something that we solve or something that we need to solve? I think we can try. We can try to make things better by curating a community, by setting up codes of conduct, all these things that make people understand the rules of being part of a culture, of being part of a greater group.
So, if people want to see what you're up to, what you have designed, what you will design, what's coming out, how can they go about doing that?
Well, the best place to talk to me in real time is probably Twitter. So it's at Sen-Fung Lim, Senfoonglim. That's on Twitter. And from there, you can find, my portfolio and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I don't get to talk a lot about upcoming things because most things are under NDA. But yeah, I talk about whatever I can. I talk about game design a lot,
Hmm.
and especially new game designers. So I want to help new game designers of all walks of life get their games out there because I think, if it's just the same people making games over and over again, we're going to have pretty stale games soon. We need new ideas from new people, and that means looking outside the typical game designer population. So, if you're interested and you need help, I am 100% ready to give you some, whatever you need. Just find me on Twitter, and there's actually a thread that is my pinned tweet where you can just ask me to help you, and I will as much as I can.
Brilliant. Well, Sen-Fung Lim, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben.